Shalom. My name is Rivka Lambert Adler. I am an Orthodox Jewish woman married to a rabbi and living in Israel. I was born Jewish, but I was born into a non-observant family, so I had to learn every single thing I know about Torah as an adult. And that makes me feel incredibly connected to what adult beginners experience when they start learning about Hebrew scripture and Jewish practice. So in this video, I'm going to introduce you to the concept of Shabbat, the Jewish Sabbath, and how you, as a Christian woman, might take steps to embrace this practice if it suits your spiritual journey. Shabbat, which is also called Shabbos, is a day of rest, worship, Torah study, and intensive time spent with family and with friends. It begins sunset Friday and ends at sunset on Saturday. One of the several places that we find Shabbat mentioned very prominently in Scripture is in the book of Exodus, chapter 31, verses 12 through 17. And this is what it says there. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "And you, Moses, speak to the children of Israel and say, Only keep my Sabbaths, for it is a sign between me and you for your generations, to know that I, the Lord, make you holy. Therefore, keep the Sabbath, for it's a sacred thing for you. Those who desecrate it shall be put to death. For whoever performs work on it, that soul will be cut off from the midst of its people. 6 days work may be done, but on the seventh day it's a Sabbath of complete rest, holy to the Lord. Whoever performs work on the Sabbath day shall be put to death. Thus shall the children of Israel observe the Sabbath, to make the Sabbath throughout their generations as an everlasting covenant between me and the children of Israel. It is forever a sign that in 6 days the Lord created heaven and earth, and on the seventh day he ceased and rested." In a traditional Jewish home, the last two of these verses, verses 16 and 17, are actually sung at the Shabbat table on Shabbat day before we make the blessings over the wine. And there's a lot to unpack in these verses. What does it mean to keep Shabbat? What work is not to be performed on Shabbat? And if the children of Israel are required to observe Shabbat, what does that mean for non-Jews? These are all fascinating questions with profound answers, but this video is actually not primarily a Bible study. Instead, I want to focus on practical things you can do in your home to honor Shabbat if you're moved to do so. In my family and in our Orthodox community, Shabbat is the highlight of the week, every week. And what I share with you comes from my experience, not just as an Orthodox Jew, but also as a Bible teacher who explicitly teaches Torah to interested non-Jews. Now, the laws that apply to Jews on Shabbat are quite strict and much stricter than anything that applies to non-Jews. But Shabbat is not an all or nothing experience. Shabbat is Shabbat for the whole world. And as a Christian woman, you can decide whether and how to honor Shabbat in a way that works for you. I'm here to offer some suggestions about what that might look like for you, but the final decision is totally in your hands. Now, why would a Christian family, especially one that attends Sunday church, want to even consider honoring Shabbat? So here's some of the reasons that I have heard from my students. A desire for a deeper spiritual connection, a desire for a set-aside time for rest, interest in the Jewish roots of Christianity, a desire to live a lifestyle that Jesus lived, seeking a structured time for family, community bonding, or perhaps you've heard other Christian families introducing certain Shabbat rituals into their homes, and you'd like to experiment to see if this would enhance your relationship with God. These are all valid reasons to explore. And as a non-Jew, you have complete freedom to do as much or as little as you'd like to honor Shabbat. Now, in Jewish tradition, Shabbat is a spiritual and a communal day. There's rituals we do only on Shabbat and things from which we refrain on Shabbat that enhance our ability to connect to God and to rest. If you know anything about Shabbat at all, you've probably heard of the practice of candlelighting, which Jewish women have done since the days of the matriarch Sarah. We also recite special blessings, share festive meals, and we refrain from work. So what might that look like in a Christian home? Well, One place to consider starting is to plan and cook Friday night dinner and maybe also Shabbat lunch in advance. The food can always be warm before the meal is served, but that ensures that no one is spending Shabbat involved in cooking. Not because it's a sin for a non-Jew to cook on Shabbat, but just because it frees you up to spend time doing the other more pleasant activities for Shabbat. You can consider cleaning or straightening up your home on Friday afternoon in honor of Shabbat. Some families set the table for Shabbat with their best tableware in advance of sundown. And these preparations can help the oncoming Shabbat feel like a special time, a set aside time to be with God and with loved ones. In Israel, where I live, the feeling of the oncoming Shabbat is one of the things that we notice very dramatically every week because all commerce shuts down. The buses stop running. Most people are not using their cars. Um, a certain kind of a quiet descends in Israel, at least in a Shabbat observant community. Now, you may not be able to replicate that, but you can certainly do it in your own home to some degree. Now, in a Jewish home on Friday night, the woman of the household lights the Shabbat candles just before the oncoming Shabbat. Before lighting candles, by the way, here's another thing you could consider doing. We have a custom of putting a few coins in a charity box, and you can consider buying or making, if you're handy, a special container to hold coins that you will later donate to charity. But to do that, to put those coins in that special box or that special bank before Shabbat. Now, lots of people have different customs, but the most common custom is to light two candles. And there's a verse in the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 5, verse 12, that refers to these two sides of Shabbat. It says, guard the day of Shabbat to sanctify it. Now, it sounds better in Hebrew, but what does that mean? It means that the commandment to keep Shabbat has two parts. There's a positive commandment to remember Shabbat, and a negative commandment to guard the sanctity of Shabbat by not violating it. That's why we light a minimum of two candles. But you, as a Christian woman, you may light just one. You may light one for each member of your family, of your household. You may light seven in remembrance of the seven Noahide laws that are obligatory on all of humanity, or anything in between, more, less, totally up to you. A Jewish woman makes a specific Hebrew blessing on the candles in which she blesses God, quote, who has commanded us regarding the lighting of the candles for Shabbat. Now, Christian women have not been so commanded. This blessing is not so appropriate for them to say, but the moment of candle lighting is a perfect time to close your eyes and ask God to bless you and your loved ones with peace, with health, with all good things. I'm going to say a prayer that's been suggested for non-Jews to say. It's a few paragraphs. May it be your will, Lord our God, that the light of your commandments will shine forth, illuminating the entire world. May all people see the light and truth of your eternal kingship, O Creator, and bind their souls to your teaching and to your service. May God favor me and my household, grant us long life, and we shall serve you. Remember us for goodness, blessing, salvation, compassion. Bless our household and illuminate your presence upon us. May it be your will, O Lord our God, that we merit to raise wise, upright, and understanding children. May they love and fear you. May they walk in truth, and may they illuminate the world with righteous deeds. Hear our prayers and turn your countenance to us, O Lord. Shine your countenance upon us. Now, that was kind of long, and it's just a suggestion. The idea is that the moment of candle lighting is on a particularly auspicious time for prayer. Now, before the Shabbat evening meal begins in a Jewish home, we bless our children and we use the words of the priestly blessing from the book of Numbers, chapter 6, verses 24 to 26. May the Lord bless you and watch over you. May the Lord cause his countenance to shine to you and favor you. May the Lord raise his countenance toward you and grant you peace. You may have a slightly different translation, but in the book of Numbers, chapter 6, verses 24 to 26, of course, we say it in Hebrew. It's such a beautiful moment. Our children stand before us. They bow their heads. We put our hands on our children's heads, and we give them a blessing. I add a little something to that blessing in English, and then we kiss and hug our kids and wish them a Shabbat Shalom. It's a really beautiful moment and something that I invite you to try to work into your Shabbat. At a Jewish Shabbat table, the festive meal is preceded by a Hebrew blessing over wine, or we usually use grape juice. Although, again, the specific words of the blessings are not appropriate for a non-Jew to recite, the biblical preamble actually is, and it comes from the book of Genesis. There's two parts. One is the book of Genesis, verse 1, chapter 1, verse 31. And there was evening and there was morning the sixth day. And then we go on to say, and we say all this in Hebrew, but you can certainly say it in English, in the book of Genesis, chapter 2, verses 1 through 3. The heaven and the earth were finished in all their array. On the seventh day, God finished the work that God had been doing, and God ceased on the seventh day from all the work that God had done. And God blessed the seventh day, and declared it holy, because on it God ceased from all the work of creation that God had done. So you might want to say that before you before you have a sip of grape juice or a sip of wine. There's another practice to consider adding to your Friday night, and that is to serve challah. Challah is a special kind of braided bread. It's often sweet, but not always, as part of your Shabbat meals. Now, many Christian women have learned how to make challah. You can go on YouTube, you can go on Facebook. There's all kinds of recipes and videos and so forth. But if you're actually lucky enough to live near a Jewish community, you can buy pre-made loaves of challah for Shabbat. Here in Israel, on Thursday night and Friday morning, there's not a grocery store or a local, we call it in Hebrew a makolet, I don't know, like a bodega. There's not a single place that sells food on Shabbat that doesn't sell challah. But some weeks I make it at home, and some weeks we just buy, depending on the week. The meals on Shabbat are festive and generally much more elaborate than weekday meals with more courses, more choices. Here's a practice you might want to consider. At our Shabbat table on Friday night, we ask everybody, family, guests, whoever's at our table, to tell a story about something that happened to them during the week that just passed, in other words, since last Shabbat, for which they are grateful to God. And we go around. So it makes sure even shy people have an opportunity to contribute to the conversation at least once on Friday night. The Shabbat evening meal very often lasts many hours because we try to weave in themes from the weekly Torah portion or other spiritual topics, just not to talk about mundane things of the week, but to talk about more elevated conversation, more spiritual conversation. So that's Friday night. In summary, there's more to it, but those are some highlights. If you decide to extend your Shabbat experience into the next day, so after a restful night's sleep, you can consider attending a religious service on Shabbat morning if such a thing exists near you. You can pray at home or with a small home fellowship of like-minded people. We eat a second festive meal at lunchtime, and then we spend time reading and studying scripture. Again, especially the Torah portion of the week. In the Jewish community, there are three prayer services each day. And so people who are part of their religious experience is going to the synagogue for communal prayer. They do that. But the point is, for the entire 25-hour period, we don't use our phones. We don't use computers. We don't watch TV. Instead, the focus is on conversation with loved ones and friends. Now, for Jews, it's mandatory, but for the rest of the world, there's value in refraining from work, embracing rest, unplugging and focusing on spiritual growth, engaging in family activities, maybe playing board games, taking walks, or just having discussion, time for discussion that fosters deeper connections. There's really so much more to say about Shabbat. And I encourage you to contact me if you have any questions about Shabbat or any Jewish topic that I might be able to answer for you. You can reach me in a couple of ways. You can reach me on Facebook, Rivka Lambert Adler. That's my Facebook profile, or by email, Rivka, Rivkah, at Kotevet, KOTEVET.com, Rivka at Kotevet.com. I also want to encourage you to consider exploring some of these Shabbat practices in ways that make sense for you and for your family. And I want to just end by sending you Blessings from Israel.